Hi, I'm the Board Game Bandit, and this is Gamer Academy, where we talk about various terms used in the gaming industry, what they mean, and how they apply to gaming overall. Today, we're going to be talking about theme. What is it? Is it important? How is it reflected in games? And I have two special guests with me, Dara Russ and Justin Davis. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Jim.
So, one of the things that we do with Gamer Academy, the first thing we do is we try to define the actual term we're going to be talking about. This is always difficult, and I really struggled with my definition of theme. And the wording that I chose was theme is a stylistic choice of the representation of a game to bridge a game's rules and its environment.
That's a really good definition. Mine's much less professional. I just said that it's a subject or topic specific to a game that wouldn't be interchangeable with another topic if it's a theme that's done well.
And I couldn't help but break mine down into kind of two parts. I feel like from a functional perspective, theme is why are you doing what you're doing? It kind of explains, kind of ties together the rules and the subject, and also just the setting and the universe that you're playing in. And that's more from a storytelling and just that perspective.
One of the difficulties that I have with defining a theme is that the very definition bleeds into whether or not a theme is important. I had to be very unbiased in my definition to make sure that I wasn't influencing the definition in either direction. And if I'm being honest, this is something that is a very difficult question to answer. Is theme important? Because there are times when I feel absolutely yes. There are times when I feel no, it doesn't. And the best way to convey that for me personally was to try and make an analogy. And I have two specific analogies that I want to make. But first, here's my official position. Theme is very important, but not in the way that you think it's important. Take the video game, for example. I love to play video games, don't get to play them as much anymore because board games have kind of replaced them for me, but I always enjoyed RPGs specifically. And the thing that stood out about RPGs was the soundtrack. I liked listening to video game music. I liked the way that sound could be used as a form of characterization. But first and foremost, video games were about playing the game. If the game was boring, it didn't matter how good anything else was. If the game was boring, I didn't finish it. It didn't matter if it had a great soundtrack, great visuals. It's a game first and foremost. The second analogy I want to make is a movie. If the soundtrack for a movie is not very good, even though that's an important part of the movie, would you not recommend the movie to someone simply because of that? Would you say, the acting is superb, the plot is great, but the sound or the lighting, no, I didn't like that, don't go see that movie. People would look at you like you're crazy. So why do we put such an emphasis on theme then if it's not the most important part? When you think about the oldest games that were abstract, they had no theme, and yet they remained popular for millennia, and they're still popular. Chess is still played popular today, and there is no actual theme on top of it. For me, a game has to be a game first. How do you guys feel about that?
I think that theme's very important for me personally, but in terms of just in general how theme is important, I think it's most important in regards to getting people to play a game and getting a game to a table. You mentioned games that have been around for a really long time and they've become popular because people have replayed it and retaught them, whereas now we have like a larger influx of choices, and so getting a game to the table is more important. And the theme is usually like that deciding factor of getting people who aren't necessarily into games to consider even playing a game.
Yeah, and I think it's very important as well. Again, going back to kind of my two different sides of theme is one is kind of the aesthetic theme, which is the artwork, the universe, the story, and I think that's important for selling a game, for getting people involved and immersed in that environment. So me personally, that's not something that I'm attracted to in a game. I'm more of a mechanics person, so that aesthetic theme I could do without. And chess and these other abstract games have done fine without any kind of story at all. But there's a functional theme as well of why are you converting these cubes, or why are you running around a market doing this? And I think that explains the rules, makes a game easier to learn. I think that's very important. So for me personally, I think that functional theme is very important, but the aesthetic theme and more of a story aspect of it, not so much.
I agree with what both of you are saying. The part that I want to highlight for me is that a theme can make a good game better. It is very much a marketing point, and there's a lot I want to say about that in a little bit. But like Justin said, a theme can provide purpose to the game. Why are you doing what you're doing? And similar to what Dara said, it is very functional in terms of its immersion. There are times when I bought a game just for the theme. That doesn't mean I feel like I'm in that environment, but there's something appealing about the theme. This is games like Nightfall, which is kind of a post-apocalyptic survival horror. Werewolves and vampires are everywhere, ghouls. That theme appeals to me very much, so I bought it because I was interested. A lot of Bandit themed games, obviously, I'm going to be interested in automatically. Some that are very good, some that are not as good. So it definitely plays a role in both the functional aspect of selling the game and the functional aspect of playing the game. So here's a question. Do you think designers design games with themes in mind, or do they design in abstract form?
It's funny you asked that because I actually just watched a video from a designer. He was talking about him and his friends that are also designers, that about half of them start with a theme and then they build their mechanics around that universe, and other people focus on the mechanics first. And then once that's done, then they kind of paste the theme on top of that. So I think that it's a pretty 50-50 split.
From my very limited knowledge of it, I've seen people who mostly they'll start with a theme, but the mechanics are more important, and that theme will change, and during the course of making the game, the theme may become something completely different from what it started as, and that's an okay thing as long as it's mechanically sound.
And I think some are more obvious than others. Reiner Knizia, for example, very obvious that he's focused on mechanics, and the theme is very much an afterthought. So I think sometimes it's more obvious than others.
And I'm saying this as a big fan of Reiner Knizia. When your game can be reprinted in several different themes, Dara and I were talking the other day about Friday the 13th that we'll be playing one of these days. It is also reprinted as a donut game with poison donuts. So if you can go from a horror theme to a donut theme, then yeah, you're probably not designing with the theme in mind. And in my experience, and I've heard designers say this a lot, they actually do design in the abstract form, and then they say, what can I do to take this to the next level? And very often publishers will actually provide the theme and say, this is what we need to do in order to sell the game. This is how it fits in with your general concept. And I often want to ask people, did you design with a specific theme in mind? The specific example that I was thinking about was Vlaada Chvátil, who developed Codenames and Through the Ages and Mage Knight. And he has a very wide spectrum of games. A lot of them are very interesting and very heavy. But he's also listed as the designer of Codenames Deep Undercover, a game that is exclusively sold in US and in Target, and that's a retheming of Codenames itself. Did he actually design that? Was that his idea? It doesn't really fit in with everything else that he's designed. Then again, he has also designed a game called Bunny Bunny Moose Moose, so anything is pretty much fair game. But it's an interesting question. How much is the theme actually supplied by the publisher or the producer? In this case, Target. They saw a market need and they wanted to address it. Did he just put his name on it and go along with it? No way of knowing until we actually talk to him, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
I actually think that his name isn't listed on the outside of the box on that edition like it is on the other Codenames variants.
That's good to know because I tried to look that up exactly. Unfortunately, I have no one who has a copy of the game. He is listed as the designer on Board Game Geek, however.
It's definitely not prominently on the front cover.
That would imply that he probably did not intentionally design that. It's just more of a, we want to use this system.
I'm sure he gave it the okay, though. I have a feeling someone else, publisher, probably did the design and he just okayed it.
Again, this is just a thought experiment. You know, we don't know what the actual answer is. He's a great designer. I really respect a lot of the things he's done. That game doesn't personally appeal to me like the original Codenames does. When thinking about a theme, it's important to think, what is a game that really gets enriched because of its theme? Any particular games come to mind for either of you?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite games of all time, actually, is completely set apart almost purely from theme as well as mechanics, but the theme takes it to a whole nother level, and that's Twilight Struggle. Not only just the history there, but the theme makes the game make sense. Whenever you're attacking or coupping a country, going through the different presidents, through the different ages, every single card in the game is based on an actual event during the Cold War, and they do happen, in succession. Even the rule book itself has an entire, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 pages of every single card and the history behind all those events. So you can actually learn, a lot of information about the Cold War, and not only that from an informational perspective, but it just makes the game easier to learn and more fun, and it just gives that feeling of brinksmanship to the extreme. So Twilight Struggle is definitely something that theme has completely set it apart for me.
Just want to say I haven't played Twilight Struggle, but I did have somebody bring it on a first date at a bar. I was just like, no, not playing this 3-hour game at Sharky's.
That's a lot for a first date.
Games that come to mind for me, first and foremost, would be Battlestar Galactica. As a fan of the TV show, and even friends of mine who have not watched the TV show, have been immersed in the gameplay very easily. Everything mechanically makes sense. You get that same bit of paranoia, not knowing who is on your side and who isn't. So one thing I really love about Battlestar Galactica is the character abilities. It's very true and thematic to the show. That's also very humorous. You see characters such as Ty that are listed as alcoholic as their special, or their disability or their disadvantage. And Hilo misses his first turn starting out in the game, which is very true to the show. Gaius's disadvantage is listed as being a coward, which is just hilarious if you've watched the show, and he's more likely mechanically to be a Cylon than not. And so because of that, people automatically go in distrusting his character if you're playing as him, which is very true to the show because he's very untrustworthy. So I feel like it's a very immersive game.
As a fan of Battlestar Galactica, the show, but having only played the game once, I would say that if not for the theme, I probably would not enjoy the game as much. It's about 5 hours, at least that's how long it took for us to play, which I'm never going to agree to normally, but it really felt like there were Cylons in our midst, and the distrust, the idea of characters having strengths and weaknesses, it really felt like the designer was a fan of the show, and everything felt pretty seamless. So I totally agree about Battlestar Galactica. I still haven't played Twilight Struggle yet, but I've heard many of the same things that Justin mentioned. For me, a couple of games that jump out are Smash Up in terms of the faction design. It's amazing to me how much the faction sounds like when you think of the name and what it actually does. When you think of zombies, you would think, oh yeah, you can't keep a zombie down, they keep coming back. Well, the zombies come back from the discard pile. Pirates are moving around and blowing things up. Tricksters are trying to mess with people. Dinosaurs, they're just really big and they step on people. These are the actual mechanics of the game. For the past several expansions, one of my favorite things to do has been to try and figure out what the mechanic is going to be once the faction is announced. More often than not, I tend to be correct, and that shows you just how well the theme is tied into the mechanics. Sometimes it can be a much more subtle match. A game that I played recently that I was thinking about was a game like Dragon's Gold. In Dragon's Gold, you have a party of adventurers that gang up together to try and kill a dragon, and the dragon reveals a certain amount of treasure after he dies. Well, at that point, there is a 1-minute timer, and everyone has to negotiate as to how to split the treasure. Now, you may not think that's very thematic just yet, but there are 4 different characters in the game that are powered 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can send whatever adventurer is in your hand at the time. When the sum of all adventurers meets or exceeds the total of the dragon is slain. And the interesting thing is that someone can contribute a lot more than someone else. Very often it's a good thing to piggyback on what other people are doing and just throw yourself into the negotiation mix, because if everyone does not come to complete agreement, no one gets anything. And almost every single time I play this game, someone says, well, I contributed more. And that has no bearing on the game mechanically. But you can bet in that type of situation, that is exactly what would happen. In a real life negotiation, you would say to someone, really, you did basically nothing and you want 1/3 of the share? That's not going to happen. It's an awkward way of going about it, but it actually does feel thematic in terms of a negotiation. The idea that I did most of the work, I should therefore be entitled to something. That's not actually how it works. So that's another example of where theme can really bring a game to the next level, because that's what makes the game. The game is interesting from a how much power am I going to spend, but the negotiation aspect, particularly in that environment, like we literally just killed the dragon, we're trying to split the treasure, that really brings the game out for me.
I think I would hate that game. I haven't played it, but I imagine I lose some friends.
I can neither confirm nor deny that I've lost friends over that game. So, if there are games that are better because of the theme, what are some games where the theme doesn't seem to matter, or where you like a game in spite of its theme, or the fact that the theme isn't really there?
Of the recent games I've played, Century Spice Road comes to mind, and that's kind of a given considering that they recently released an entirely different theme with the exact same mechanics, which goes to show that it works no matter what the theme is. Originally it was spice trading, and the Golem edition was released at Gen Con, which is exactly the same mechanically, but it's sparklier and it's more eye-catching, and generally people that I've brought both games out, they prefer the Golem edition just because it's not as saturated thematically in the hobby as trading spices.
For me, Lords of Waterdeep actually is one of my top 10 games, and I know there's a theme there. You're trying to collect, these different color cubes, but in reality, you're going on quests and you're collecting wizards and clerics and rogues to try to complete these quests. But when you're actually playing it, most people just resort to saying, "Oh, I need 8 orange cubes and 2 black and 1 white," and so the theme really doesn't come through a whole lot. I know some folks try to buy the little meeples to go along with it to let the theme kind of show itself a little bit. But in all honesty, it's such a smooth worker placement game that just doesn't even need that. It's a great game regardless. I have no problem calling them orange and white and purple cubes. So it's still one of my favorite games, even though the theme really is barely on there.
It's funny you mentioned the upgrades to enrich the theme, because I was actually thinking of that exact game as one that I have encouraged friends to get the meeples for, because it does change the gameplay, and also one of my friends is colorblind, so that helps. And in that same regard, Pandemic is one where you have cubes and you're just trading those around. But when I started playing the Legacy game with my friend who's colorblind, I switched out to the upgraded little disease shapes and things like that. The game is perfectly fine without, but it can immerse you further in the theme as well. In addition, Pandemic has done a really great job with their expansions, adding things that aren't necessary but make the game more visually and thematically appealing, such as one of the expansions has the roll cards that look more like ID cards, and one of the expansions has the petri dishes to put the disease cubes in.
Yeah, funny you say that. Actually, Pandemic is on my list of great theme games. I remember back when that game first debuted, within months I was all over it, just because I already work in a medical lab, and as soon as I saw the theme of that, and that it was about an epidemic and diseases, bacteria, viruses, I was all over it. And still, I love that game. The theme just puts it over the edge for me. So definitely love Pandemic just because of the theme, as well as good mechanics.
Pandemic would have also been on my list of great theme games. There's many that I have listed down. I'm just going to rattle off names because we don't have time to go through all of them. Cult Express, for obvious reason. It's literally a game about being the best bandit on a train and punching and shooting your friends. Deception, Murder in Hong Kong, the accusations that are going through, the idea that there's a witness who knows the information and is very carefully trying to convey that to other people. Pandemic, as well as Forbidden Desert. In Forbidden Desert, the idea that you are trying to dig and excavate your way and you're blocked by sand, and that really inhibits your movement, and the idea that there's a storm that's moving and you can't see where you're going. I definitely like it. It makes the game a lot better. As far as poorly themed games, I'm the first to admit that Dominion's theme is not really there, and I honestly do not care. It's my favorite game of all time. I know people criticize it because there isn't a theme. I'll get to that in a second, but I think that games could be good in spite of not having a theme. If it were an abstract game, it would not change the gameplay, which to me is clean, elegant, and just exactly what I'm looking for in a game. Lots of decisions, lots of replayability, many ways to approach the game. another game that I've been thinking about recently that I really enjoy is Alhambra, the Spiel des Jahres winner from 2003. To be fair, I had to double check what we're actually building, what country we're building in Alhambra. It's Arabia. That's what I thought. But the very fact that I had to check meant that the theme didn't really matter. It doesn't change the fact that mechanically, I love that game. The idea of having to pay for exact change and getting an extra turn adds so much tension because you see the card out there that will let you get an extra turn on your next turn. But you also know that someone else has been collecting blue. Is it going to be out there? Can you wait and get everything that you want? Or do you have to drastically overpay now? Mechanically, that intrigues me so much that you could swap out potentially any other city or any other country and you'd have the same game. But it doesn't change the fact that it's a phenomenal game, a Game of the Year winner, a game I still play and have introduced to a lot of people despite the fact that it's over 10 years old. So, as we've discussed, there are games that are better because of the theme. There are games that are good in spite of the theme. But now I want to play devil's advocate because the truth is that a great theme can't necessarily make a game good. And there are a couple of examples of this. One of the games that I really enjoy, particularly because of its theme, but I'm one of the few people I know who actually like this game, is Dead Last. Now, this game, if you're not familiar, is about a tontine or a pact where the last person who survives gets all the gold. This is a real life thing. The Simpsons and Archer have done very memorable episodes about that. Check it out if you haven't seen them. And it's very much related to Survivor, the board game, if you watch that reality TV show. I personally don't, but in Dead Last, it's a very mean game. You are systematically eliminating people and getting everyone to gang up on particular people. I love that. For me, I recognize that Dead Last is pure game theory mixed in with the prisoner's dilemma. I've studied both of those extensively, so I get the actual game. But for other people, it's just mean and it's picking on people, and it actually holds the record for most rage quits in a single night with 7. Now, this is a 12-player game. We started with 12 players, lost 7 of them, and still finished the game because we got someone else to come in and take the spot. So even though the game is very thematically relevant, you really do feel like you are making deals and betraying everyone left and right. That doesn't make up for the fact that it rubs people in the wrong way, and if you're not willing to see the game for what it is, they're not going to get past the meanness of it. So a theme, I enjoy the game, but I admit that in trying to be thematic, the game is actually held back in the general audience, and it's not going to be for everybody. Another example would be Boss Monster. The video game lover in me wanted to buy that game based on the cover art alone. The idea that you're the supervillain, you're the bad guy, and you're going to lure heroes to their death. I love the artwork, I love the theme, I love the idea, but mechanically, the game is a mess for me. It definitely has a runaway leader problem. I'm going to be talking about this a lot, I'm sure, in future podcasts, so I'm not going to say too much about it now, but as much as I like the theme, that doesn't mean I should buy the game. And I don't even play the game because it just doesn't work. Changing the theme around, or even reducing it, isn't going to make the game any better. And there's nothing that you can do thematically to improve what is a flawed mechanic, in my opinion. Are there any examples of that for you guys?
I really wanted to like the X-Files board game when it came out. I pre-ordered it. I was excited to play it because I have friends who were really into the show as well. So we were ready to love this game. But even with hardcore fans of the show, it just fell flat for us. The gameplay, the mechanics don't do it justice. The character who is playing as the cigarette smoking man is completely imbalanced, and I've had plays of it with different player count, and I don't think it scales well. It's too much variation. It's one where I've considered buying the expansion to see if that fixes it, but then I feel like I'm digging myself a hole to enjoy it even less and be more bitter about the money I spent on it.
One game comes to mind for me in this category where the theme just doesn't quite save it, and it's unfortunate. I personally like this game, but it doesn't get the love that it deserves, and that's The Lord of the Rings, another Knizia game. It's a great co-op game, one of the earlier co-op games actually, and the theme just comes through so strong. I mean, it's Lord of the Rings, everyone is familiar with, but as the game is progressing, it really feels like the odds are stacked against you. The game feels impossible at times, especially when you include some of the expansions. We usually play with friends and foes, which makes the game so much harder. And the first few times we played, some of the players just swore that this game could not be beaten because it was just such an uphill battle. And you see Sauron getting closer to you, the ring bearer is about to die, just that tension there. The theme is just perfect for Lord of the Rings. However, from a mechanical standpoint, a lot of people are turned off by this game just because it's so, sometimes it can be a little bit scripted or bland in the sense the board tells you to just discard a friendship and then do this and then roll this die and then do this, and there's definitely some randomness involved, and sometimes the choices aren't really that difficult to make. So as much as I love that game and the theme is amazing, the mechanics have definitely caused it not to be as popular today as it used to be.
I think it's also possible for the opposite to be true, where a game is mechanically sound, but the theme actually hurts the game. And I'm sure we're going to have some crossover when we talk about our examples, but are there any games you can think of where you like the game, but the theme can really turn people away?
For me personally, no, but there are a lot of games that I just will not play because of the theme, because there's so many games out there. If a game theme doesn't appeal to me, I'm probably going to choose something that does, and unfortunately that's a lot of the more classic games such as Caverna and Agricola. I have no interest in farming because I grew up on a farm. I'm done with that.
What about games where the theme might actually be considered offensive, or that people really want no part of?
I have seen that as well with games such as Cash and Guns. I've tried playing that with my nieces, which probably makes me sound like a bad aunt, but they refused to shoot their mother. So I got shot a lot, and one niece completely refused to shoot anyone, so that was not fun. She also did not want to blend kittens and kittens in a blender. I don't know who's teaching these kids morals these days. It's really taking all the fun out of.
So me personally, I've just never been a big fan of. There's two very, very common themes that are abundant with board games now. One is the space theme, and the other is just that kind of cliche fantasy world theme. A lot of dungeon crawlers I've always wanted to try. This like Arcadia Quest. Some of these seem really interesting, but they always have that same fantasy theme. And so I would love it when one day it's a different theme than that fantasy theme, and kind of the same thing with the space theme there. And in terms of themes that are even offensive, this isn't, I mean, this is actually my favorite game of all time, but a lot of people actually will not play Puerto Rico just because the theme involved there, in terms of whether the colonists actually represent slaves or not. And some people find that offensive.
That brings to mind Spirit Island, which just came out, or actually I'm not sure if it's available to buy yet. It was at Gen Con. One of my friends bought it, and I enjoyed it a lot because it kind of flipped that script where you're playing as the spirits on this island and you're attacking and killing the people who are trying to colonize it. I really appreciated this kind of overdone theme given a completely different perspective.
I'm surprised none of you would have said Secret Hitler, a game that I know I've had discussions with people about. You can reskin it literally with like pasted on errata cards to be Secret Dictator, and for me it's the Resistance, the next step. It's not that different in some respects from some of the Resistance expansions, but that theme can really turn people off. I definitely, Cash and Guns was on my list.
It's interesting, the theme that you say turns some people off, but maybe introduce other people into the hobby who wouldn't otherwise be interested. Most of my friends like the pretty smash up expansion. Most of my guy friends really like being the princesses, and it's a lot of fun. Games like Herbaceous and Birds of a Feather and Lotus are games that I think are atypical theme-wise, and they're games that I really enjoy because they show that games don't always have to be conflict-oriented. So I use those to kind of surprise people who don't understand like the expanse of options that board games provide. They have only seen a very limited number of games, and they think that everything's like Risk or competitive or dungeon crawling. And then you can have these things that they're just not expecting there to be a game about growing herbs competitively, about watching bird watching competitively. That sounds crazy, but it works, and it's very attention getting.
So one final thought I have, and this is a comment that I make very carefully. I mentioned in the beginning that theme is important, but not in the way that you think. And I mentioned that a good theme can make a good game better, and we've talked about examples where the theme can't save the game. Everything about a theme relies on the concept of suspended disbelief. We have this in movies, in comic books, in video games, where we're accepting that not everything is going to be realistic. For the people who think that theme is the most important part of a game or the thing that they think of first, I want to challenge that because no game is actually thematic, not even close. If you think about it, most games, unless they are involved with real time, have the concept of a turn. Name a war where two sides sat within line of sight and took turns. Is that really what it's going to be like? Where you can see your enemy, but you're going to carefully wait for them to decide what to do. This description describes a lot of board games, so already, if I wanted to, I could detach the theme from the mechanic. That's not any fun, because then we couldn't play any game if we were evaluating on that criteria. But the point is that theme matters, but you could always find a way to make a game not feel thematic. Justin brought up the example of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has a card game version, which is San Juan. San Juan seems very similar to Race for the Galaxy, the space theme that he's not a fan of. The two games are very similar, but one is set in San Juan and one is set in outer space. Now, Race for the Galaxy is one of my favorite games of all time. It does not need to be set in outer space. You could take the exact same mechanics and set it differently. Simultaneous action selection, that is not a realistic thing. I cannot think of any example in life when people just sit around and wait and all do things at the exact same time. That's not how the real world works. It works in real time. The point I'm trying to make is that we can talk ourselves into or out of liking something purely based on theme alone, and that to me misses the point. Games are games first because of their mechanics. If you can take a game, keep the mechanics, and just change the theme, that means that the mechanics are actually the most important part. That's the part you choose to keep. That's the part that you thought was good. That being said, I still very much enjoy themes. I will buy games because of the theme. I'll want to play games because of the theme. But I do not want to make it be the primary determination. I was listening to a review not that long ago where I had a legitimate question about the game, and more of the review was spent talking about the theme than actually talking about the gameplay. I started to wonder, are they even reviewing a game? And that to me is missing the point. So, to summarize, theme is very important, but it's not the most important part of a game. A game is a game because it has constraints, it has decisions, and outcomes. If that's not our primary evaluation criteria, we're probably doing something wrong. The theme is what takes it to the next level. Very often, it's a publisher-related decision. It's something that can be applied after the fact. Still important, but not the primary point.
As somebody who feels theme is one of the most important things to me, I will take your challenge very seriously, and from now on will only play Captain Sonar, even though it stresses me out and I don't like it that much for that reason.
The same thing.
So, checkmate.
Yeah, and I agree with you for the most part. I'm more of a mechanics over theme person. I don't really need that aesthetic theme to enjoy a game. However, one thing that hasn't been a big focus is more of that functional theme that helps explain the rules of why you're doing what you're doing. And this is a lot more important in Euro games, I feel like. And one game that I didn't mention, which is probably the only game I have ever played where I think the mechanics are great, but I purely didn't enjoy the game and got rid of it purely because of the theme, because it did not help the mechanics flow, and that's Trois. It is a Euro game that is highly regarded, but the theme is just non-existent. I know that it's in France, and that's pretty much the extent of the theme. And literally, you see the gears of that game. You're pretty much doing a math puzzle, and you're going through this phase by phase, doing these different things that they don't really make a whole lot of sense. And usually the theme will tell you, okay, well, why are you doing this? You're attacking off invaders. But in this case, it just feels like you're seriously staring at the gears of this game, and it's just a math puzzle, which can be fun. But for a game that takes over an hour, doing math puzzles solitaire is not really my thing. That's probably the only game I've ever had to just completely get rid of because the theme killed it for me. So
There are starting to be more and more abstract solitaire puzzle-like games that are math puzzles. Dimension comes to mind. Number 9 comes to mind. So there's nothing wrong with making a game abstract, but to Justin's point, sometimes it might be better to accept that a game is abstract and not try and add a theme. You can probably turn more people away by trying.
yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's a little different with a Euro game that's expected to last an hour and a half. And the theme here really tells you, okay, why am I picking up these black dice? How come I can come over here on one phase of the turn, go back over here and convert some cubes and then go back over here and do it again? Why exactly am I doing that? There is actually some logic to it, but it's so thin you just see through that. So it's more so the mechanics that get confusing because all you see is those gears turning. Whereas those solitaire games you're talking about that are popular now, I feel like they're a little bit more simplistic. They may be shorter games, a little bit more about that math puzzle, and they kind of accept what they are, and they don't try to be this long Euro game that just has a weak theme.
The final question I want to ask you both, and I don't know the answer to this at all. Board game universes, do they matter or not? This is a big thing in cinema these days. I'm a big fan of the Marvel universe. I am not a big fan of the DC universe, even though I'm more of a DC guy than a Marvel. And now there are board game universes. Coup is set in the Resistance universe. There's a Spectre Ops universe. There's Mechs vs. Minions, which is set in the League of Legends universe. How much does this actually matter to you?
Very little to me.
I was going to say the same.
I don't care too much about aesthetic theme. However, every now and then there is a universe that is appealing. I haven't played Mechs versus Minions, but I would like to because I did used to play League of Legends for a little bit, and so I find that universe appealing. So rarely a universe is appealing, and sometimes if there's a game that I don't like, so Near and Far is one game that they have several games now in that same universe, and because I don't like that one, I just automatically don't like the other games in that same universe. So it's kind of worked against itself for me a few times, but for the most part, I don't really care about that level of theme.
I don't want to know you anymore. I like Near and Far a lot. Mechs vs. Minions is great. I'm going to get sidetracked here, but that's what I do. It's one that thematically is amazing, and I say that as someone who's never played League of Legends, but playing through the campaign, playing through the tutorial, it feels like you're playing a video game. They teach you incrementally. You discover the powers that you have as you go and the mechanics as you go, and that feels very much like a video game, and that's pretty amazing. But to get back to the question about the shared universes, I don't think that matters too much for me so far. There are definitely licenses that appeal to me. I pretty much buy everything Pandemic, even though at some point I should probably stop and be a little more choosy. But as far as the world that it's in, sometimes just that one game is enough. I don't have to have every offshoot. Like you mentioned Spectre Ops, and Crossfire is in the Spectre Ops universe, but I don't feel like that specifically makes it any better or worse of a game for me.
I just want to clarify what I'm actually asking, because to me, it doesn't matter, because there is no such thing as a board game universe. It's more of a legacy game than anything else. So Pandemic Legacy, things matter from game to game. If things were really in a universe, then Coup would have some form of impact on the Resistance, but it doesn't. It makes more sense in the movie universe where the events of Civil War are going to have lasting implications on Marvel Phase 3, just like Age of Ultron had implications on Civil War. There's a direct thread between all of those. I think it's more of a marketing technique than anything else. I didn't know that Coup and Resistance were in the same universe until I read it in the rulebook, and I'm like, oh, okay, I have no idea what that means. And it's remained that way. The story has no consequence from one to the other. I really don't think it's a thing, but I think it's another attempt to try and use theme to sell people on something.
That seems to be the case with Raxon as well, which is in the Dead of Winter universe, but nothing about it being advertised appealed to me, even though I do like Dead of Winter. It didn't have the same crossroads system, which is the most appealing thing to me about Dead of Winter. So even though it's the same universe, if the mechanics don't bring it for me, then I'm going to disregard it.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for coming here today. Hopefully, you learned a little bit about theme, whether or not it's important. And admittedly, this is a difficult topic. There are no wrong answers, like with any definition. But the important thing is that you need to make a decision for yourself. It's perfectly fine to like what you like, just be consistent with it. I'm the Board Game Bandit, and this was Gamer Academy.